thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the first real experiment to have a panel, and it's about getting the panel of experts around New Zealand and also through Australasia, talking about different types, variants of kind of risk management, business, all that kind of thing, but with that risk management theme. So from popular demand, we thought we would start with today being data. The data seems to be something that everyone's talking about, not really sure about, and wanting to know maybe some next steps from the professionals and people who have been there of how to do it. So today's about data risk, cyber, BCP, conduct and compliance. It's quite a mouthful, but what we'll do today is please raise your hand at any time you've got a question. We'll especially take questions as we go through. We'll make it quite interactive, so don't hold back. Now's the time to do it. And yeah, let's see how it goes. And we've got a bunch of subjects coming up we'd like to experiment with too. But if you know of something you'd like to do or something you'd like to put forward, please get in touch anytime and we can do that. Or if you want to host yourselves, also let us know. So I'm just going to start with a quick intro. So me last. So Martin Petz, head of APAC for F24 through Australasia and heading the business development. Martin's been working with us for quite some years. He's a sponsor of Risk New Zealand. Very proud to have him on board. And he certainly knows his stuff when it comes to crisis management, and certainly something New Zealand needs now and going forward. So thanks, Martin, for coming.
Thanks, David.
We have, thank you, David Fox, owner and director of Fox Risk Consulting. I would say David is one of the top risk managers in New Zealand. And again, we've worked with Dave for years, and he's doing a lot of consulting here, globally as well, as far as I understand, and a great deal of experience. So thank you both. Me, CEO of Risk New Zealand, trying to do my best to do that anyway, mainly wash the windows. But it's been a great experience being with Risk New Zealand and dealing with people like yourselves and the members. Now, I'll just hand over to yourselves. Martin, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself and a brief background?
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, you kind of covered it. I don't like talking about myself too much. But yeah, like you said, I look after the business for F24 in Asia Pacific and Australasia, Oceania. And yeah, we're if you don't know F24, we're focused on technology in the resilience space. So yeah, we help lots of clients to kind of automate, digitally transform their resilience, risk, business continuity practice, basically.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin. Great to have you here. David, can you give us a brief background?
Brief background. Started in risk management about 25 years ago in the UK. Worked professionally in the UK, Middle East, Europe, all over the place. Started off very much within the project program space and then migrated through into the business enterprise organizational space as well, because the two tie together. Since coming back to New Zealand in 2020, it's been a bit of a roller coaster trying to get back into risk in New Zealand. Different cultures, different takes on the regulations around it, but we're starting to make headway. Organisations like RiskNZ, great, pushing the correct way of doing things.
Thanks very much. Thanks to you both, and we'll get right into it. So I'm going to start with first, just to kick off, and I know this is something that people have asked me about, asked Risk New Zealand about, and certainly at the last summit they were bringing it up. What is data? Over to you both.
What is data risk? And like I said to you the other day, David, I'm going to try and say data throughout this whole conversation, but I probably won't. So it'd be good to get feedback from the audience. But what is data risk is a really good question. What should you be thinking as an organization or even as a person? What you're risking when it comes to data. So, is it making sure that you're storing the right data? Is it making sure you're protecting your data? Is it making sure you've got a holistic view to data risk? Like I say, it'd be good to get some feedback from some of the clients, but also some of the audience, but some of the clients that David Fox works with. He probably would be able to give a good kind of angle on what they see data risk as meaning would be good. But yeah, it's whatever if you're storing data, you need to be aware of the risk that storing that data gives your organization, basically.
I think from a enterprise organizational business side, the question is even more fundamental than that. It is, what is data? What is data in relationship to the business? For me, I see, just like anything else, a business, data is an asset that the business has that enables them to function and deliver. It's also a liability as well, because if you're mishandling it or collecting the wrong sort of data, then you're opening yourselves up to issues. So fundamental questions about viewing data as an asset within your company, and then how you protect that asset going forward, through things like cyber risk, and even just where it's stored, physical risk as well. Where is your data? So that's from a business-centric point of view. But I agree with Martin. It's an interesting conversation to be had.
Thank you both. And I'll start with you, David. Just another question to also go into the next stage. And we'll be talking about experiences and steps that people can take kind of soon to look after their own backyard and different areas. Dave, from experience, what do you think organisations kind of need for the future? So now stepping off into always an uncertain future, especially around data management compliance, and it's getting quite heavy in the regulation. Boards are feeling it, senior leadership teams are feeling it. What do you think it needs?
I think we can all recognize that data, technology, everything is moving at a very rapid pace. It's outstripping our ability to agilely adapt to changes because it moves so quickly. Our traditional business governance models, where the boards might be reviewing risks or horizon scanning, might be every quarter or 6 monthly, sometimes even annually. It is just not rapid enough and agile enough to allow the board to rapidly change direction when a risk starts emerging, particularly in the realms of cyber. One of the things Martin will, I'm sure he knows this about, that you can have a cyber breach and not know anything about it for several months. So how do you detect these things beforehand? What do you put in place? And how quickly can your business pivot to minimize the damage that breach does? So being agile in your business planning, your timeframes, traditionally you might have a 3, 5, or 10-year business timeframe. Maybe that's a little bit too slow when you're looking at the data side of things. Maybe you might need to have shorter windows that you're looking at to allow you to be more agile as things change.
Right.
Yeah, and sorry, David, I was going to say, just having an appraisal of the current situation in your organization is a good place to start, because a lot of organizations won't know where their data is stored necessarily, and data will be stored in various different places depending on what you consider your sensitive data is. So, for example, if you are using Office 365, then that data is sitting with Microsoft somewhere. If you're using a third-party system, then they may be storing on a different data center. If you're using things like WhatsApp or social media to communicate, then again, that could be sitting anywhere in the world sometimes. So it's having an awareness of where that data is sitting is really critical, and how sensitive it is if it's sitting in different places.
I would agree on that. I mean, working on many programs in New Zealand and a little bit in Australia, but here the last few years, sometimes we'll be on big, large programs and think we've got the data sorted, or we think we've got it secure, or the information. And when it's kind of a tick box exercise and we haven't actually tested that, then that can run into trouble maybe down the track, especially if you're changing teams and things like that. So I think it's really crucial, and especially in big programs, as part of your planning, to actually get it right, and not make any assumptions with it. So just on that one, when we're talking about, say, cyber security and data, what would you recommend or suggest that people would do in a breach? And look, in New Zealand, we've had a few breaches, and it's caught a lot of organisations and big ones by surprise. How could people start looking at it now, maybe start prioritising, looking at the key points, and actually getting ready for something?
So I think kind of going back to the start and just kind of understanding what your critical data is, where it's stored, like I just said, but validating through an exercise would be a good place to start. Also, being able to detect a cyber breach, like you kind of said, David, is another good place to start. Companies have had data breaches and they've not even realized for 6 months, 12 months even that they've had a data breach, or someone's hacked into their systems and they have been able to walk around within their system without anyone knowing for a long time before they've even triggered or activated a response to that, because they've just literally not known that it has happened. So that's probably a good place to start. Are your warning systems intact, or do they work well enough for you to detect a cyber breach or a cyber attack? And then off the back of that, when you know that you have had a problem, you've had a hack or a cyber breach or a data breach, then it's having a process for addressing that, but then also carrying out exercises, realistic exercises for that scenario.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Martin. Coming from my perspective as looking at business enterprise risk, it's not just the cyber breaches, it's also loss of data, loss of your asset as well. What do you as a business do when you've lost your customer database? What's the next step? How can you recover that? Do you have recovery plans? Do you have business continuity plans? Is there a crisis plan in place? Because any sort of cyber breach is going to hit the business predominantly at the reputational level and then potentially financial level. Just looking at some stats from last year, there was a quarter survey of 200 odd, 300 businesses, and 59% of respondents admitted that they had cyber breaches in that year. So it's a big issue, and we're not very good at managing that issue or recognizing it. We make a lot of noise about it, but it's the what do we do about it, which is missing.
I think it's a really good point, and thank you both. And just to chip in there, and it's still happening, is when you're talking about BCPs, backup plans and response. And I work with government departments, local government and organisations, and I find that there is I don't know, it was kind of an almost semi-standard, I think. There was testing BCPs, say, every 18 months. And what we found from many is that they're bringing it right down to, say, 6 months or even quarterly, 3 months actually testing those, because what we saw was the BCPs weren't tested. About 30% things on there weren't working they thought they were, like satellite phones not even charged. People had changed, people didn't get the brief. And also when something happened, they didn't use the BCP because they'd been untested. They didn't have faith in it. So they started reinventing the wheel, which I think everyone on this call may be familiar with. And then all that money and time spent was kind of out the window because they reinvented the wheel straight away and didn't go with it because they didn't trust it. What are your thoughts on that?
BCPs, I've worked in putting together BCPs for customers in the past. And where I always start is BCPs are there to business continuity plans. And I always start with the company saying, well, what are the key assets in the business that enable you to deliver that? And then we start going through a business impact assessment against those assets. Data is one of those assets. Your customer information, your financial information, and what do you do? Based on that and your risk appetite of your business, a lot of people don't take this into consideration when they're looking at business continuity. Businesses should have a risk appetite to their risk, and that's based on how much risk the business is willing to take in pursuit of their gains. Around data and cyber, they might have quite a low appetite for that sort of risk. But does that appetite match the risk resources the business are putting in place to manage that at that suitable level? Quite often I'll find that no, it's not. They might have somebody in IT doing their cyber stuff, and that's it. He's the guru. He leaves and it's all over. So it's matching your perceived risk, your priority of your assets all together to understand where your BCPs need to be put in place. Maybe, for example, you've got a key data center that's in a flood zone. Is that really a good place? When you're starting to do your mid to long-term business planning, do you need to change that somehow? What are you going to do? diversifying your data storage areas in the cloud, even where you're going to put things. Martin's much more an expert on this. But from the BCP side of things, it's a plan that you have to test. And things change all the time. Your estate is changing. People are adding new bits of technology into it. How is that getting swept up into your BCP planning? What's being put in place? And the connection between a BCP and the crisis management is also really important. And it's a distinction of a BCP is there to put in place to keep your business operating at some level, okay, whilst your crisis management team are forward-looking and looking at how do they manage that crisis, whether it be their customers, their reputation, financially, what do they need to put in place to change the business strategy to get themselves out of it and recover, hopefully in a stronger position. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I was going to kind of take up the point about testing. So testing your crisis management plan, testing your business continuity plan, testing it realistically. So especially in a data loss, IT issue, cyber breach, the main thing that you have to make sure you test is you may have compromised IT in all of those scenarios. So you could well have lost your Office 365 access or even your Office 365 capability, because if you found that you've had a hacking event and someone is within your Office 365 environment, you may not want to use that technology to respond to that incident, because the hacker may well be able to see what you're doing, see what you're communicating about. You may be talking about whether you pay or do not pay a ransom over email, and the hacker can see that communication going backwards and forwards potentially. So it's having a scenario exercise that takes away some of that crucial IT infrastructure. So you now cannot use email to communicate, or you now cannot use Teams to communicate. It's having that realism for this for an exercise in these kind of scenarios, because people will generally just let's just use our IT business tools to respond to this IT issue, and it's not necessarily that realistic that you can use those tools.
No, thank you. And just a quick one here. Anyone, please ask any questions anytime if you didn't get the brief at the beginning. Just on that one, thanks for that. I'm just thinking, we talked about the other day is third party, so like suppliers, supply chain, and you touched on it before. Organizations may have good BCPs and may have the good data in place and may be doing what they can, but how do you see those third or fourth parties as a risk to that organization, and what maybe should we be looking for or do in that area?
Yeah, supply chain risk management is quite key. Understanding your relationships with your supply chain, understanding what security they've got in place, because you're expecting them to share and protect your data as well, and vice versa with them. Quite often, foreign actors will target your supply chain to get into you. You might be quite secure, but they might find a loophole or a vulnerability in your supply chain to try and get in. And that often happens. We often talk about the increase in cyber attacks. Some of my risk colleagues in the national security side of things talk about global Cold War. We are actually in a global cyber war at the moment for data, and everybody's after it. So the normal businesses are getting swept up in this through the supply chain. So any vulnerability that you've got will be sought after and potentially used against you. They might not be after your particular data. You might be, for example, you might be a customer database holder, and one of your customers might be a key politician. They might be just after his data, but they have to go through you to get there. So understanding the security and the sensitivity of your data should give you an indication of how what the priority should be. It's a highly complicated, really changing environment we're facing, and Martin, you're much more in this space?
Well, I was going to just say it kind of goes back to that initial appraisal. It's like, do you really need to be holding the data you're holding? You know, I mean, I don't know whether in the MP example there, I don't know whether you could distinguish that you are holding an MP's data, you know, if it may just be a random customer to you, but you know, it's kind of appreciating the sensitivity of that data. You may not appreciate some of the sensitivity of the data. You know, I've had phone calls with just personally with organizations, not just in New Zealand, but where I've had to provide quite sensitive information about myself, date of birth, passport ID, you know, even scanning in identity documents for them to approve, you know, whatever it might be. And that is sensitive data. You know, if that disappears or is posted on the internet, people can start applying for credit cards or whatever using using my ID details. So it's all that kind of thing. Don't hold data on people if you don't need it. If your marketing department, for example, is saying, oh, why don't we get their email address when you don't need an email address, or why don't we get their telephone number when we don't need a telephone number? It's kind of that, I guess, internal organizational conversation of between maybe marketing and risk to say, well, actually, marketing team, do we actually need that data for our customers? And the marketing team might want it, but the risk team might say, well, we don't want to hold that information because it's too sensitive. And I was talking to somebody that works in crisis response, literally taking phone calls from public after a data breach. I was talking to them, actually a month or two ago now, but he was saying they were getting phone calls from customers of this company that had lost some data from, for example, a woman that had an estranged husband, and she was now worried that her address information was now public knowledge, and her estranged husband could find out where she lived. So it's even considerations like that that we need to think about, because there's some, even not that, you know, you might think someone's address isn't that sensitive, but it actually can be in certain situations.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, recently, I think Stats New Zealand had to apologize for a data breach. You know, that's one organization you'd expect to be very secure with our data, because they're responsible for capturing loads of data about us when they do the census. So it's, you know, it's everybody's being affected by it. And it's, you know, it potentially is scary. I've been when I was in the UK, I was a victim of identity fraud. Somebody got hold of my data and was buying mobile phone accounts all over the country with it, and all the bills were coming to me, which was quite fun to try and explain that it's not me. It can take a while, and that's at a personal level. At a business level, you've got, you know, ransom attacks where they will shut your business down and hold it to ransom, and that's scary. You know, this sort of risk puts businesses out of business. Businesses close. They lose their reputation in the marketplace, and people won't do business with them anymore. So it is a big risk. It's one of our, you know, from a business risk perspective, it is one of the most significant risks that our businesses should be paying attention to, and I'm pretty sure they are. You know, cyber risk and environmental change are big ticket items.
Yeah.
One of the things that Dave, just sorry, jumping in there, that we talked about was, you know, data regulation, the regulations that tell us the sort of data we need to hold. They change. I was in the UK when the GDPR change took place, and working with businesses, and there was a huge struggle to change how they held and what data they held. And honestly, a lot of these businesses had no idea that the data they held, how long they'd been holding it for. So that's one of the things, you know, regulation. I think I mentioned it the other day. Regulation is a lagging risk indicator, meaning that, you know, the government or regulators have perceived this risk. It's a known risk, and that's so fundamental that they actually have to put in regulations that businesses have to comply to. So if you're only doing what the regulator says as far as your cyber stuff, good, you've got your tick in the box, but that's not enough because it's a lagging indicator. There is risks out there that the regulator still hasn't come to grips with. AI, what are the future regulations for businesses around AI? How does your business manage the AI risk? Was it yesterday that PricewaterhouseCoopers in Australia had to apologise and hand back half of their fee on a report because they'd used ChatGPT to write most of the report? That was a $440,000 report that they had to stump up. So businesses need to be looking at the risks around data, around cyber, around technology that they need to be managing, and how they can put in internal controls and policies in place to help them manage it, not just wait for the regulator to come along and tell them what they need to do.
Very much, David, and thanks to you both again. And just on that example that you gave also, I think that a lot of times organisations will get so set in their risk management ways of looking at certain things, doing things a certain way. And I'm no expert, I'm learning every day. But one thing I advocate for is always sitting down, challenging, what are we doing? Are we doing it properly? Or we have too much expectation on what we're doing, or we think we're too good? Is there areas of improvement? Now, how many organisations do that, looking in the mirror and saying, what else can we actually do? There's not many, but you do that exercise, it can change the whole direction of the organisation. It can change the risk profile, can bring it right down almost overnight if you're kind of chatting about it. And I've just got a question from Stacey. It kind of goes back a little bit, but it's very relevant, and we may have just touched on it, but I think it's a really good question. In your experience, where do organisations most often over control, so in brackets, wasting effort, and under control, in brackets, real exposure and data risk? What is the simplest BC exercise you have run in this area that worked well?
It's a really good question. Over control. Quite often I see it going into businesses because controls are in essence risk mitigations for the business. And quite often the business will have changed and the risk has gone that control was in place to manage, or it's no longer as relevant as it used to be, but the control is still in place. And people say, well, why are you still doing it? Oh, we've been doing this forever. This is what we do. And it's inefficient. What's the risk that control is trying to manage? So it always comes back to the basics of risk management. Understand the context that you're operating in. What are the risks in that area? And then match the controls to those risks so that you don't want to over control because that takes away flexibility and agility and ability to adapt and move. If you are a sort of business that has your risk appetites are minuscule across the piece, then you're going to have to put a lot of resource into controlling that risk, and you're probably not necessarily going to be as agile or as profitable or as competitive as the competitors. So you've got to balance that control right. In regards to BCPs and looking at that, it's taking that risk lens at your assets that you've got that deliver your business benefit, and understanding how likely it is for a risk event to occur that will take out that asset or damage that asset, and what the impacts to the business, your core function, would be. And that gives you a priority of where you want to start hitting your business continuity plans. Hopefully that answers your question. Happy to carry on if you want.
Thank you. Martin, anything on that question?
Nothing more to add to David's answer on that question, really. I just noticed that the further question in the chat, actually, but I'm sure you're going to ask that one.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the answer there, David. And the next one is from May is, are we obligated to obtain customers' explicit agreement for us to share data with third parties to enable us to deliver the services? Or can that be built into the terms and conditions, in brackets, i.e. you agree by default?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm just reading it again to make sure I understand it. this kind of goes back a little bit to what David said about GDPR.
Yeah.
I was also in the UK when the GDPR regulation came out in Europe. And we had, this may not be directly answering the question, but I'll get onto it. We had a marketing database of tens of thousands of email addresses. And we decided, well, we kind of decided as a company to do this, but also the regulation kind of drove it, but it was a little bit of a gray area. We decided to delete almost everyone's details in that database. It's a marketing database, if I didn't say that. If they had not explicitly given permission that we could have their email address. So going into this question, and we lost a lot of marketing the asset, like David Fox was saying earlier. That information is an asset. So we decided to get rid of a very valuable asset to make sure we didn't lose our brand reputation. As a company that is trusted by a lot of companies to hold their data, we need to make sure we maintain that reputation for holding data very well. So are you obligated to obtain a customer's explicit agreement for us to share data with third parties? I would say, and David Fox will correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully. I would say, yes, you do need to obtain explicit agreement to share data with third parties. I would have thought, but to deliver the services, the customer would not necessarily know that you are using a third party to deliver the services. So you probably need to make sure that that is clear, because you are sharing or needing to share that data with the third party, or can be built into the terms and conditions. Yeah, so it's that feels like a bit of a gray area. I think if you hide it in the small print that you're going to share the data with a third party, that might be a bit dodgy. I would have thought that you have to explicitly say that you're going to share that data with a third party. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the New Zealand regulations in this area, but I would have thought in GDPR in Europe, they would want you to explicitly tell them that you are going to share your data with a third party. David Fox, am I right?
Yeah, partially. Yeah, I'm no legal counsel either, but I have worked with businesses and they've had these same problems with data. And one of the bits of advice that I was given was, as long as the data that being shared is core to the delivery of your service, then it's okay. For example, postal delivery, they have your physical address. They can share that to other parties. They share it internationally to the international postal people as well, to make sure the delivery takes place, because that's core to their service. So if it's core to the service, then I think it's okay and it's written into the general terms of delivery of that business. If you're sharing data that's not necessarily core to your business, then I think you'd be asking why. You should only be sharing data that is important to the delivery of the service, particularly if that service is the service to the customer as well.
My 2 cents, I would agree with you both, and agree with you, David, is from what I've seen also is if there's any doubt or if you're wondering, I think it'll always get agreement, because it's done, it's dusted, you know exactly on the same page, you know where you both stand. The worst thing in the world is getting a phone call on a Sunday or a Friday night saying that we didn't know you were sharing that data and this is where it's ended up. And that's where it usually happens on a Friday night. So I agree with that one, yes.
But that's also then where you need to start looking at your third party, because, are they then protecting that data well, and what are they doing with that data? Are they sharing it with a supplier of theirs? And then it's, you need to start looking at that supply chain to make sure that that data is safe.
Actually, Martin, I've got a question for you. In your field, do you see many businesses doing third-party risk assessments around,
more and more, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more and more, but it depends. It's not always the case. So there's just not that much awareness around that subject. Again, more and more as time goes on, more and more people say, especially because we are obviously a third-party supplier to a lot of organizations, so we will get a lot of checks on where we store our data, and are we ISO certified for our data storage, and do we align with GDPR and things like that, which we do. But we do get asked that more and more. But the thing that makes me laugh is sometimes organizations will come to us from using a tool like WhatsApp for their communication. And so it's like they're very strict on us and what we're doing with their data, but they were previously using WhatsApp and no one checked. So it's kind of, but which is a good thing, because they're using a tool which may not be that secure from a data perspective, moving to potentially a more secure thing. So it's a good, but that's what I mean. People are starting to think about it more and more. So that is it's all moving in the right direction, basically.
Thank you. And look, just bang on that question, on the answer really is another great question for me is, to what extent do we have to check our third parties' data protection policies and practices?
Well, like I just said, we are a third party, so I'm quite used to our customers asking us what our data protection policies and practices are, and we usually tell people up front. We say we're ISO 27001 certified for information security. We say we're aligned with GDPR. But you definitely, especially if, I mean, again, it depends. If they're not, I suppose with May's question, her first question, they do have some sensitive data by the sound of it, the third party she's talking about. So I would definitely be checking on what they're doing with that data and how well it's protected. So yeah, so I would definitely be doing that.
Yeah, I see from a business standpoint, the businesses that tend to be third parties or in the supply chain to highly regulated businesses like banking, for example, maybe you're a supplier into a banking, that banking organization will do a really deep dive into your capabilities. To manage risk as well. They want to understand your risk management capabilities, your cyber capabilities, because you are a vulnerability to them. So part of their regulatory requirement is that they do that. And I think that's really quite healthy for any business, to have that sort of rigor, to demand to understand the people that they're dealing with. How secure are they? Do they take my risks seriously? Within contracts, we quite often share risks or transfer risks to contracted parties. Do they have the capabilities to actually manage those risks that you're giving them? Because if they can't manage it, it's just going to come back on you.
I would agree. And just a 2 cents there again is, and we've kind of attacked this before with different organizations. And I think one of the simplest things you can do is come up with a criteria for all. Make sure you've got all the criteria in there you want to hit, so it's not ad hoc or it's not kind of by chance. And so you make sure that everything is aligned to what you want protected for your own business with those third parties is in line. And if not, you discuss about it, how to do it. And I think that's a really good way to probably measure it.
Well, also, I was going to say, why not involve your third parties in your exercise scenario? Let's make sure that we do an exercise scenario where your third party has lost your data, and involve them in the response. So that will kind of help you weed out what they're doing with your data, because they'll say, okay, well, we supplied it to someone else, and so you're starting to have a pretty complex scenario, and you need to get third parties involved in the response in the exercise. But that really tells you everything that's happening, I would have thought. And then just another comment on third parties. So a lot of, and it goes back to what David Fox was saying about AI. A lot of companies are using AI now, which really is a third party. So you're putting, everyone, a lot of companies are saying to their employees, by all means, use AI, hopefully within a set of guidelines or within a certain set of training or education, to their staff. But that tool is then being used with potentially sensitive information going into that. So if someone is, I don't know, writing a report or something, and a lot of information about the organization needs to go into ChatGPT or whatever tool they're using to write that report, people need to be aware that data is then potentially, there are things you can do to limit the exposure, but that data is then potentially exposed to the internet, or to people, for people to find. So, and it kind of goes back to that comment earlier about things are moving so quickly right now with technology. There are not regulations in place. Governments are not educated enough themselves to know how to regulate some of these new technologies that are coming in. So you need to really be expert within, or have an expert or two within your organization, or an external expert that can help you with these new technologies and your risks and exposures that you have as an organization, basically.
Yeah, it really comes down to the policies that companies have to put in place, which are really going to have to be novel with the advent of AI. I'm hearing horror stories of financial planners or managers in companies being hit by what they think is a phone call from the CEO, asking for, I need to have this. I'm overseas at the moment. I need some money. Can you send this money? And you'd think, nah, who's going to fall for that? But if it's a video call from your CEO asking you for the money, then who are you going to believe? And people need to recognize that AI is getting really, really good. And it's a tool that's being exploited heavily by criminals.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Great answers. And it got me thinking. I got asked the question before this webinar, and it was just in conjunction with what you're talking about. It with SLTs and boards and everything we're talking about today, and especially with the budgets and the CFOs. What is the best way to get the message across and influence that certain areas, say like BCP, data security, whatever, needs due attention? And how do they get that attention from those senior teams? What are some of the best ways to do that? Because there's too often something will be, it can wait, or it can leave it, or it's not feeling important enough to the senior teams.
This is a really good question in the New Zealand context of how we in New Zealand do risk management a little bit differently to elsewhere. In Europe, predominantly, the advent of cost-based risk management, applying costs against our key risks to understand what the financial implication of those risks are, even reputational risks. You might go, it's a reputational risk. How do you cost that? Well, you can cost that because that's based on how much business you do. If your reputation is hit and you lose 2/3 of your business sales, what's the cost of that? So you can actually apply that. And boards sit up and take notice when they start seeing numbers and costs. When they're just seeing red, ambers, and greens, it's an excuse for them not to do much. Give them the information that they need to be able to make informed decisions. They make informed decisions based on real numbers, even ranges of numbers, costs, timescales, things that they can wrap their minds around and see, not just high, medium, and lows. It's hard, and it's something New Zealand we're not really good at doing. It's something that I'm very passionate about trying to introduce, that it's not as hard as we think it is, but it works well.
It's interesting because a lot of, in other countries, not so much here in New Zealand, boards and certainly C-suite can potentially be a lot more accountable. They, in terms of prosecution and things like that, even imprisonment in extreme cases. And even here, you're seeing resignations and potential firings when things have gone wrong. So so things, whether you think that's moving in the right direction or the wrong direction, is open for debate. But yeah, it's kind of C-suite board level are becoming more accountable in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, totally agree.
No, thank you. And great to know. It helps me as well. I'll answer that question back to the person. So with our time now, really opening it up for any questions anyone may have, and while we're waiting for any potential ones that may come through, from the both of you, is there any thoughts finally about any kind of tips or what you've learned or something you'd like to pass on?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
We've done quite well, actually. I think we've covered quite a lot of the ground that we wanted to cover. I think I kind of go back to the start, and I feel like an appraisal, some kind of look at what you're doing from a data perspective. Like I said earlier in the conversation, understanding what data you're holding, understanding where it is, understanding your risk, knowing your risk appetite for what you're exposed to. That as hopefully a lot of organizations have done that already, but if you haven't, it's a really good place to start. Understand your current state of play, and then, because until you do that, you don't really know what you need to do next.
Yeah, totally agree. Understanding what data is and how it is for your business. What sort of data you're catching? Where is it? Some parts of the business may need some different types of data. The other parts of the business don't. Even when you're looking at systems in a business and how the systems pass information around and where that is kept. One of the clients was having issues with raw video data, which was potentially had customers' information on it. Where's that stored? How's that stored? They might be able to blank out certain parts of the information when they present it online. Particularly courier companies, quite often you can now get a picture of them delivering something, but the raw data still has all the information, and that's needs to be secured. The information they present online should have everything blurred out that identifies the location. But it's understanding what systems have the data, where it is, and how they communicate with that data, passing it around. Financial systems, postal systems, anything. They shuffle data around. Knowing where it is important.
And just quickly to add to that, understanding having someone in your organization that understands these up and coming new technologies is important, because a lot of organizations just don't understand what is happening with some of these new tools, basically.
Oh, I completely agree, and thanks for that for you both again. And just on that point, really quickly before we get to it, one of the last questions that came through from me, it's a really good one, is getting that advice can be very overwhelming. There's lots of people who want to give advice. There's lots of experts out there, and there seems to be everyone who knows everything. And I think one thing I've learned, and certainly tell or advise organizations to do, is really look hard, really ask the hard questions, make sure the advice is aligned to where you want to go, and make sure there's a solution. There's lots of advice out there which will dance around a solution, which I think we started kind of getting used to, especially from some providers. But actually make sure they're giving you a result for the money you're doing, and make sure you can actually do something at the end of it. So I think that's a really big thing to pass on. But just with this question is from me is data ownership and accountability predominantly a tech or ops responsibility?
Good question. I would say it probably. It's almost I don't know is the answer, but I would imagine it's a tech responsibility to understand it, and maybe an ops responsibility to do something about what they're told by tech. I don't know. It's both, I would say, is probably the easiest answer.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's an interesting dynamic, because you've got the tech guys that physically hold and secure and protect that data, and the ops guys that make use of it. They either collect it or digest the data. So it's that sort of dynamic. The ops guys need to make sure that they are handling the data coming in and out in a way that's secure and safe, and the tech guys need to understand how it is being protected and maintained safely. So it's two sides.
Great.
Yeah, we don't. Organizations should not be siloed. So yeah, you need to be working together.
Thank you. Look, no more questions coming at the moment. Martin, any final thoughts from you?
No, I don't think so. I think we did well. Yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything. I think it's just getting questions. I'm sure. I know you're going to put the recording of this up on the website and stuff. I'm very happy to answer questions that come up from people watching the recording as well. So yeah, it's more about trying to help people that want to know more and answering questions. So nothing more to add proactively, really.
Thanks, Martin. David?
What I'd suggest is for any organization that is faced with this and realizes that they've they've got a mammoth task ahead of them. Do your foundation correctly, understand the context that you're operating within the data, and then just like you eat an elephant, it's one bite at a time. Don't try and rush to get to a hugely mature area. You need to step it up, because it takes the culture of the entire business with you, and it is a long journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's not going to happen unless you start that journey as well.
That's a good point. We did, and that is one thing I forgot to add, David T. Culture, yeah, company culture. We did talk about this in the pre-call yesterday, but yeah, company culture. You've got to make sure your culture is right, and that kind of goes back to the training on new technologies like AI and things like that. It's people understand. Each staff member is now in a unique position where they can potentially lose data from the organization just all by themselves. So that's I mean, that's probably always been the case, but it's even more critical. It's even easier now for them to lose information from the organization.
Great. Hey, thank you both. That's been really brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I learned something today, so I really appreciate that. Thanks everybody for logging on today. We'll have this recording available kind of soonish, and we'll certainly look at other subjects we could do for other panels. They might be at the end of the year or in the new year. And please send through anything you'd like us to talk about, or indeed if you'd like to come on the panel. And we'd like to go and hit the other 100 subjects we probably have around risk management. So thank you very much both.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.